Hola, and welcome to the Get Down. I'm Ritzy P. In this episode's All Things Butterscotch segment with CEO and Managing Editor of Butterscotch Media, Cleve Mesidor, we will discuss Cleve's political passions. And today's guest is Dr. Tonya M. Evans, Esquire. She's an attorney, academic, and a founder, and we'll be discussing the changing crypto landscape, her book, Digital Money Demystified, and so much more. So now, let's get into all things butterscotch with Cleve Mesidor. Hola, Cleve. How are you?
Hola, Ritzy. I am good.
Well, speaking of your past and your history, you emphasize that butterscotch is focused on policy, not politics. But you have an extensive political background. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Yeah. Politics is in my blood. I think I've mentioned before that I served in the Obama administration. I was a political appointee. I also worked in Congress. I worked for Barbara Lee and Betty McCollum. I served on national campaign. I worked on the first 527 America Coming Together during the Kerry race back then. And I even ran for office myself. I ran for city council in DC in 2007. So politics is very important to me. But you know what? I see politics as a public service, which is why I believe it's about the policies, not the politics, because the political landscape is intended to come to compromise, right? Try to find solutions to solve the problems of real people. And that has been my focus throughout public policy, throughout the work that I've done across national campaigns, working in a administration, working in Congress.
Amazing history. No wonder you know everybody, right? So your book is titled The Clevolution, My Quest for Justice in Politics and Crypto. That's quite a transition. What was the motivation?
Yeah. People may be surprised that after, a long political career, serving in the Obama administration was certainly historic for me. I was a big fan of Shirley Chisholm, and I really believe that President Obama's election was validation for her. But unfortunately, one thing I realized during the Obama administration was that we couldn't solve the problems that we wanted solely through politics. It was actually then that I sort of became disillusioned. There was so much that we wanted to do during the Obama administration that, quite frankly, the process wouldn't let us do it. And quite frankly, being a consensus builder, as President Obama was contrary to being able to push those things forward. So luckily for me, I first learned about Bitcoin in 2013 while serving in the Obama administration. And as I learned more about it, I learned about this whole core value of freedom, of economic opportunity. So for me, it made sense. I felt like I found my tribe, I found my place, and I found that vehicle to advance the changes that I thought were important.
Fantastic. 4 years ago, in January of 2021, you organized a Biden-Harris blockchain inauguration forum and an open letter to the administration almost 4 years later. You recently organized a virtual meeting to discuss inclusive policymaking priorities a Harris administration should consider. Why is this important?
Well, because inclusive policymaking and rulemaking has never been a priority. When you look at the rules and the data sets that inform policy, oh my God, they're from not just the 1930s, the ninth, probably before that. So we are actually leveraging policies that don't factor in inclusion or diverse communities because they are so old. So much of our financial services rules are from the 1930s. So when you look at trying to change policies, trying to make sure that we're balancing consumer protection or financial inclusion, that we're talking about capital formation, which is wealth creation, it is very hard to push that through. Many people don't realize most presidents, regardless of political party, end up advancing the previous president's agenda because the system is just so much bureaucracy in there that it's hard to actually push inclusive policies, inclusive rulemaking, which would require radical change. So for me, after Biden and Harris were elected back in 2021, in January 2021, I organized that forum. Tel Harper was a speaker, and it's incredible. Almost 4 years later, he is now running for Senate. We had Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York, Stacey Plaskett from the Virgin Islands speak. Congressman Dan Soder from Florida spoke. We had this conversation that because we needed to make sure 4 years ago to let this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, know that inclusive policymaking when it came to blockchain and cryptocurrency was important, and it was important to diverse leaders in crypto. Clearly, we didn't get very far in terms of that call, that mandate. And here we are almost 4 years later. So it's important to reset that conversation, have that conversation. We know that the earliest adopters of blockchain cryptocurrency are Black, Latino, Indigenous, Asian. So we're going to lean democratic. But we have to establish the rules of engagement. We have to let our policymakers know what it is that we're looking for. So that's why recently, I helped once again to organize a virtual meeting where we can talk about what are our policy priorities.
Great. So our guest today is Dr. Tonya Evans, and you two have worked together before. Any good nuggets you want to share before our conversation?
Oh my goodness. I'm a big fan of Dr. Evans. She's an early crypto pioneer. She has a heart for entrepreneurs. Also, she was part of the January 2021 inauguration event that I mentioned. She was one of the speakers. Actually, her company, Advantage Evans, was one of the sponsors. She continues to be an advocate for inclusion in crypto. She operates at the highest levels. And also, more importantly, she's a fellow Bison. We're both Howard University alum.
Nice. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Cleve. I look forward to our next discussion about all things butterscotch. So let's welcome our butterscotch queen, Dr. Tonya M. Evans, Esquire. Dr. Evans is a leading authority in copyright, trademark, fintech, and technology law, currently serving as tenured professor of law at Penn State Dickinson Law, with the co-hire appointment at the Penn State Institute for Computational and Data Sciences. She also brings her expertise to the Digital Currency Group board and has previously chaired the MakerDAO Ecosystem Growth Foundation board. As a host of the Tech Intersects podcast, Dr. Evans engages with listeners on the latest developments in digital finance and Web3. Her pioneering work includes the creation of CryptoLawGuide.ai, an AI-enabled learning assistant designed to transform legal education for the Web3 era. An accomplished author of Digital Money Demystified, she is developing a series of books to guide lawyers through evolving digital landscape. Dr. Evan blends her extensive legal experience and innovative educational initiatives to provide valuable insights to future law and emerging technologies. Hola, Dr. Evans. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
Excellent, Ritzy. Thank you. And shout out to the entire Butterscotch crew. I appreciate you and all that you all are doing in this universe of crypto and Web3 technology and finance. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So you're an attorney, an academic, a founder. Can you tell us about your professional journey as well as when you first went down the crypto rabbit hole?
It's funny because I have a very traditional and also very non-traditional path into what I really call the intersection of law and new technologies. And so starting out, it's interesting because both of my parents are deeply immersed in science. I have a mother who's a patent attorney who, specialized in chemical engineering. I have a father who's a retired surgeon, a colorectal surgeon. I was the precocious, adorable, as you can tell now, still to this day. I was sports, I was creative, intellectually curious as well. And so it was interesting, this blend of intellectual curiosity, but also creativity. And that kind of led me down two kind of parallel tracks. One, education was an absolute priority in our home, needless to say. even not just the generation before me, but the generation before that. When I was probably 3 and 4, my mom was in law school, my dad was in med school, and I was being cared for by my grandparents in general, my grandmother in particular, and she was a primary and second grade educator. And so I would go to school with her and sit in the back. And so basically I went through first grade 2 times before I actually went to first grade. So they thought I was a child prodigy. Another way is perhaps I had to take it 3 times. I don't know. But anyway, by the time I got to first grade, I was pretty darn smart, and that helped to immerse myself in learning and confidence, really to kind of put your hand up and engage. I think that's always critically important for women in particular. Fast forward to also being an elite athlete. So I played many things. I actually probably was better at basketball than tennis. I was actually recruited for college to play both. At the time that I came up, it predated the WNBA, certainly, the ABL, which was another league, women's professional basketball league. And so my option, I thought, would be to pursue tennis. I attended Northwestern on a full tennis scholarship. And then I played professionally for 4 years from 91 to 95. Fun fact, probably the best year, not probably, actually the best year of my tennis career was winning a national tournament and getting a wild card into the qualifying rounds of the US Open. And that was in 93. So around that time, interestingly, I met the Williams sisters. They were skinny, gangly, giggly girls until they stepped on the court. And that was like a lot younger, but a lot better. So that, that was an interesting thing. I think I lost my last tournament. I was the first seed, lost in 3 sets. My best friend met me in Puerto Vallarta, and we drank tequila for a week. And I said, I better get my life together. And so took my LSATs over, went to law school. I went to Howard University School of Law, graduated with honors. I was the editor of the Law Journal. And then I did all of the big traditional things. I clerked in the Third Circuit for a federal judge. I started in big law at white shoe firms. And it's interesting, that point is when you have the credentials to be in the rooms that you don't feel comfortable being in. Or I'll say it differently, a place where you deserve it, but they don't deserve you. And
Right.
so when I kind of saw that I was doing all the right things, I'm kind of a color inside the lines kind of person. We'll talk later. I'm going to get to my rabbit hole experience and then answer any questions, but it kind of leads up to the rabbit hole because I say all that to say I'm actually quite risk averse.
Mm.
Even to this day, it's kind of hard for me to believe the work that I do, but a lot of that comes from my legal training of being an issue spotter, a problem solver, coloring inside the lines. I take my reputation, I take my licensing very seriously. I'm licensed to practice law in 4 states. But I also know that I have a responsibility ultimately becoming a law professor and a tenured law professor that I didn't know when I started hearing in 2017 what crypto and blockchain, whatever the heck this stuff was with this magic internet money, what it meant for me personally. But I did have a responsibility as a professor, and I was an associate dean at one time as well, to usher in the next wave of lawyers who would be conversant in this space. And so that was my entry point to at least learn enough. It was a time when people were saying blockchain, not Bitcoin, right? It's like 2017. ETH came on the scene with the gangster lean. We had the proliferation of tokens, et cetera, right? So I was like, we really need to make sense of this, and kind of leaning into what it meant at the intersection of intellectual property. I'm an intellectual property lawyer by training, and this new technology, whatever it was going to mean. To final point, 2 weeks later, it's kind of like around Christmas holiday. I think I had the same pajamas on. I came out of YouTube University screaming with a tinfoil hat that this was going to revolutionize and change the world. And that set me on a journey to really figure out. I just realized how important the technology is. And even the first use case for financial innovation of a time-stamped way of securing, protecting, and making accessible the data that now has value, that was really big. But what else could we do beyond it, right? So that was kind of my rabbit hole, the traditional, non-traditional into my rabbit hole moment that kind of leads us to where I am today.
Fantastic. I really appreciate the point that you made, that you were the person to color within the lines, risk averse. And I think that's very important, especially coming from a woman of color, a Black woman, an attorney saying like, listen, I'm in this space. I've done the research. This is how I am. But there's ways. And I think it's the misinformation of things, right? And it's being exposed to platforms like this, people like yourself who are out there, exposing us to all the information that we need to make an informed decision, to see that this is a possibility for our communities. So moving into present, you've served on the board of directors of major companies in Web3, from MakerDAO to Digital Currency Group. Can you tell us more about that experience?
It was a really, really important and pivotal moment, not only in the development of this nascent asset class, the ecosystem, but also as a Black woman and also a Black queer woman to have, a very public place and space that's not like lip service, right? Not just to be there to change, but to actually change within. My specialty in working with boards, and the first one was being chair of the MakerDAO's Ecosystem Growth Foundation, MEGF. It was kind of a mouthful, but it was kind of at the point where you have kind of this, and I'll speak more broadly than specifically about the team at the time. But, we don't have to imagine a world where you have a bunch of guys. They may be the stereotypical crypto bro kind of outside looking in, maybe not the bro in terms of the Lambos and all the craziness. But when you think about the lack of diversity in tech and the lack of diversity in finance, and then you combine those two into this microcosm that is cryptographically secured asset and decentralized technology, there are not a lot of us. But so it was important for me. And I also, as I said, take my reputation very seriously. There's a lot of stuff going on in the space. So I will not participate in a project that I don't believe in and trust. So getting to know where this group of people, kind of like a 1.0 version of let's move fast and break shit. Let's, technologists, and then maybe we'll call legal, but we don't have a legal department, right? There's no centralization and the buck stops here in most cases. As, some projects start as Maker did. Some you start centralized, tweaking and necessarily working things out, but it raises a whole bunch of legal and regulatory issues and questions that have yet to be resolved. It raises issues of cross-border collaboration and regulation in various countries and geopolitical issues, religious and all sorts of others. There are all sorts of things that builders don't think about and they're not trained to. So it's a feature, not a bug. But, we saw so many projects die on the vine, maybe issuing unregulated securities, not intentionally. When you are building in a space that is disintermediating heavily regulated areas, finance, healthcare, government, that you can't operate outside of that. There's no going off of the grid. And so I'm kind of, I don't, for lack of a better way to describe it, when people want another adult in the room to say, okay, understand what we're doing. Don't send me a 50-page document that says I can't do it or it depends when I send you $100,000, although please do if you feel so entitled. But I'm sending you a text. I'm on a Telegram. I have a Discord and I need an answer in 5 minutes or like yesterday. Who's that person at the intersection? And so my specialty is going on to boards kind of in their next phase, not the startup phase, but that next phase when you want to take good and make it legal, compliant, and great. And so that's what I think about the Maker environment. We had 3 independent board members, only 2 from within. And that is a show that the project is really taking it seriously to move to full decentralization. We were very, very successful. Maker is one of the most consequential projects in DeFi. And so I'm very proud of that. And then that wound down. And then I have the opportunity to participate with Digital Currency Group, or DCG, as a board member, has a portfolio of over 200 companies, one of the most consequential in Bitcoin and in the ecosystem. The things that you learn in the rooms where it happens cannot be overstated and certainly shouldn't be underestimated. So that's been a very powerful way to take my expertise and lend value, significant value to the build, particularly from a matter of the law, regulation, and policy.
Right. You are out there in the trenches learning by doing, and that's valuable. So let's talk about your book, Digital Money Demystified. What's that all about?
It's interesting because all of the myths and the misconceptions, the FUD, as we say, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I had to grapple with each of the questions and answer them as an attorney and as an educator only for criminals, just a fad, just a scam, just for the crypto bro, too early, too late, too volatile, right? And really sit with it, the idea of it. And also, again, not someone who's trying to sell something other than a book and your opportunity to learn more by working with me, right? Not a project, not a token, etc. What do people need to do and learn? Not under the hood about hash and blocks and all this, like what, where, why, when, and then they can answer the question of how, right? So the book is really the first stop or revisiting, because a lot of people who are saying, I know that. And then when it's a quick read, they read it was like, oh dear God, I didn't know anything, right? Like
Right.
we cannot know all the things. Every day I'm learning something new. And the person that says they know everything there is to know about the space, exit stage left for my Gen Xers who are listening. It's like, what is the information that I needed to get myself as a risk averse person trained, personally and professionally. I'm that person who's kind of like on the Leo Virgo cusp. So I'm the life of the party until I'm ready to go home, and I'm super tasky as well.
Right,
Right?
John.
Love a good
Yeah.
project with a beginning, middle, and an end. So what are the things that people need to know so that they can make prudent and informed choices? The worst thing someone can do is to have fear, and fear is what I describe as a double-sided coin. The idea of fear of missing out gets people wrecked constantly. Just throwing
That's
money
right.
just to, with the run up, we saw a lot of people get wrecked, like with Robinhood and all these other things. But also the fear of getting in is, I think, equally damaging because there are very few opportunities for systemically marginalized populations, women, people of color, poor and middle class folks. I mean, we have this shrinking middle class that we're constantly talking about as a matter of politics. When are the opportunities for us to actually get ahead? And we have a lot of people who are kind of the 1% of the 1%. I got no problem with 1%. I got no problem with money. What I do have a problem with is if it is siloed for the privileged few who get to speculate and play and fail forward and have millions of dollars thrown into projects that are dead overnight, and the rest of us who do so much with so little. When do we get opportunities to move forward? And there are very few times from an economic point of view when things open up and give you that opportunity to be ahead of the curve. This is such a time. The idea that the best time to get into real estate was a long time ago. I love real estate. I own real estate, do all the traditional things, but I'm not necessarily going to invest in a way that might make me a gazillionaire right now. I love stocks and bonds. They're capital assets. That's another way. Having a good retirement account. But if you are systemically marginalized in terms of employment, will you ever have access to the things that traditionally allow us to get ahead in the next generation? Crypto is taxed as a capital asset. It's extremely volatile, but over time, it's up and to the right. That's a good day for any asset class. And so that's why I don't want us to miss out for fear of getting in, but I also don't want us to move too fast because we have a fear of missing out. So that's what the book is intended to do, to right size the conversation, separate fact from fiction so that people can make good choices.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to read, especially you said it's a quick read. So everyone should go out and read it, and then
Absolutely.
buy one for someone else for sure. So
Please.
you recently wrote an editorial for CoinDesk entitled How Kamala Harris Could Usher in a Clean Slate for Crypto Regulation. Please share your thoughts with our audience.
It's an interesting time right now. And I want to lend my voice to the conversation because I share so much of the energy of disappointment and, quite frankly, anger at the policies in place in the current administration. I'm a diehard progressive Dem. I might be fiscally conservative, but clearly socially liberal given the way that I move in the world. And so it's important for me to have both and the policies and the practices and the approach, particularly under the Securities and Exchange Commission's chair, Gary Gensler, and some very powerful senators on Senate banking, that is the legislative committee in charge of oversight, for example. And so people always point to Gary Gensler, but you don't really get, and the chair and the commissioners for the SEC that regulates in the area of investments, making sure that there's transparency for security so that if you have a new registration or something of that nature, that the people who are creating the investment opportunity don't have all of the information and everybody else doesn't know anything. Like at a broad level, that's the intent, to protect investors, to protect capital markets, to blah, 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 blah. Do you protect capital markets when there's a new asset class that is not illegal, but then you, along with prudential regulators, they're responsible for banking, don't allow a good faith, lawful business to actually have access to banking? Is it fair to go and sue the pants off of good faith actors who have come into the office and to engage in dialogue to have greater clarity around regulations, only a few weeks later to get what we call a Wells notice of an intent to sue, while at the same time you're kind of suing like Coinbase or Gemini or Ripple, some of the really big and good faith actors. But at the same time, on your watch, someone like Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX gets to scam people out of bazillions. Like, how does that happen? In what world does that make sense? And so the policy, while not written in stone, is called Choke Point 2.0. The advice to every agency under the executive to have a hardline anti-crypto stance. That is anti-American. I believe it's anti-democratic. And I believe that economic empowerment is a deeply progressive issue. It's actually not partisan. It's either at a bare minimum bipartisan. I might even argue nonpartisan. Talking about money as a resource is always political, but it need not be partisan. And so in the CoinDesk article, I'm writing something for Fortune right now and some other platforms to really signal to Vice President Harris and as she staffs up to iron out these policy issues and decisions as she's running and going, for me, hopefully into the office, but whoever actually takes over, that there has to be a reset in engaging the crypto community. They're pretty fed up, kind of pissed off. So it's the kind of like, what signals could happen now? Keep in mind, she still has a day job. She's still the vice president of these United States of America. There's only so much space that can be created. If you've ever been in middle management, I know that I was not in lockstep with my boss. When I was outside, I towed the party line. The inside, we have our conversations. There's only so much that I can do. When given the opportunity to have power, make informed decisions, there is space that can be created, but we need a little space, grace, and pace in the community. That being said, I feel like there's some money on the sidelines for Dems, for independents, for never Trumpers, or those who want a new direction for issues other than crypto that would be willing to support our campaign, but need to see some evidence of that. So final point, just writing these articles, hoping to signal to whoever would listen, here are some strategies to move forward. One, to signal that it might be a kinder, gentler world, that she's willing to engage. She's the first Democratic candidate within the administration. There certainly have been legislators that have been supportive to actually consider going to what I would probably consider to be somewhat of a hostile environment, going to Bitcoin 2024. That was 48 hours after she learned she was going to be the nominee. Got a few things to do. It's a little, security and the like, but signaling that there's another opportunity to re-engage and there's another choice to be made from anti-crypto. Bitcoin and crypto's here to stay. How can America be a leader in that? So that's the point of the CoinDesk article and some of the other things that I've been working on.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big uproar, especially, I'm sure, on X, Twitter. How come she's not going? Oh, she was, and it's just like, well, yeah, like you said, she has a day job, a significant one at that. So kind of expanding on what you were talking about, what are your thoughts on the changing policy landscape, regardless of who enters the White House in January of 2025?
I think you definitely have to have new leadership at the SEC. I think that is the first and probably the easiest thing to signal. Now, the GOP nominee has promised that on day one, he would fire Gary Gensler. I also teach administrative law, and it doesn't work that way. You don't go in and say you're fired, and then the next day, 5 new people show up and you get, a new person. Certain agencies within the executive branch, we have this, not to wonk out for law, but you have legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch, right? The president is like the CEO of the country and basically carries out the day-to-day functions based upon the laws that are passed in the legislature. And if anything gets out of whack, the judicial branch gets the final say to say whether that's lawful or not. So now you don't have to take constitutional law. You just got common law. Within that, you have certain agencies that serve at the pleasure of the president. That's your cabinet. And then you have independent agencies that are supposed to be outside of the political process. In fact, on the SEC, the actual commission, there are 5. Whoever is in power at that time, you'll have like 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Or if a Republican is in office, you'll have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. But they have layered terms. They're 5 years. There's no limit to 5-year terms, but there are a few steps that one would have to do, and it has to be a firing or removal, as we would say, for cause. That could take, if everything worked out to the next president's advantage, like 6 months. That will never happen. Or it could be 2 years. It could go on longer than the term of the person in office. It doesn't. So anybody who's a single issue voter just on replacing Gensler, like there's some other thing, like think again, find another issue.
Yeah.
Also thinking about, there's a lot of, I don't know how I feel, but here's an issue that we should all pay attention to, and certainly any new administration, what to do with Bitcoin reserves held by the federal government. There's a lot of discussion about making sure that the government hodls. There's some conversation about creating this special reserve that's of Bitcoin. And that will be, we'll have to parse that out as things go forward. And I know that like Senator Lummis is big on that. There are others that have some questions, but that's something that we should think about. Clear regulation, perhaps a new regulator for crypto. Maybe that would be the CFTC, which regulates commodities. And only and unless you have something that also is a security would be the purview of the SEC. So those are some things that immediately should be addressed, making sure that lawful businesses are not debanked, like with this kind of like shadow ban for banking. And then finally, just making sure at an international level that we are collaborating. This is a global currency. This is a global technology. It's kind of like checking out of Web 2.0. Like, no, we don't want the internet here. No messaging here. Okay, that's a choice. Not a great choice, not a great choice for America, not a great choice for American citizens, not a great choice for the world, but it is a choice. It just makes no sense in this context. Web3 is not just the packages of information or creativity. The package is value. It's extraordinary. It opens up markets, opens up liquidity, opens up opportunity and access and inclusion in ways that we can kind of take peer-to-peer technology and file sharing back in the day, mostly copyright infringement, but it's fine. I'm a copyright lawyer. It's fine. But now using that same technology to like do remittances. And if I send $1,000 to Mexico, that literally is $1,000 worth of Bitcoin or stable or something else. That's a game changer. That's deeply progressive. And that's a win-win across the aisle. So those are some of the things that I would have a new administration focus on, kind of to reset our relationship as the United States to this industry.
Love it. Love all those points. So what would you have our audience, compel them to really consider right now?
When you think about from a political point of view or from involvement in the crypto ecosystem?
From everything that we've discussed today and what you're an expert in, and if they're listening to this, what is the call to action?
Take a moment to find your next right step. Whether you are already in the crypto space, maybe you've bought a little, and you could do it as easily. I'm not sponsored by Cash App or Venmo, but you've been able to buy Bitcoin for a long time. Find out, and you do it in a space where you trust. The optimal engagement with crypto is being your own bank and holding your own money. Financial sovereignty is another deeply progressive part of freedom. But freedom is kind of the big umbrella. Financial freedom is a part of that. And that's why the single issue voter around crypto, I ask you to take a second look. When we think back to Satoshi's vision from the white paper, think about the launch of Bitcoin as the people's money. When we think about the fact that this was an invention that changed the world, that could have been protected through patent, but that we don't know who he, she, or they are. And that's a feature, not a bug, that on day one, fully decentralized for the people, people's money. I don't personally use it for an exchange because I'm believing in kind of the store of value now, but I could. The lights go off in the United States. If we have another kind of global meltdown with 2 companies that manage to keep everybody stranded, how do you engage? When I know coming from 9/11 and you couldn't get money out of an ATM and the world is uncertain. We're living in one of the most uncertain times in my history. I'm 54 years old. And when I think about, one, I can't believe that we're having the same discussions that I fought for and that my mom, more specifically, my mother, who's 77 and lived in a time where she had colored only water fountains. These people are still alive on both sides, right? So it's kind of like, don't get too comfortable and make sure that, you have your passport, you have, money, but you also have a global currency that will be accepted anywhere. That gives you freedom of movement. That gives you freedom of choice. That gives you freedom of options. It unlocks the other freedoms. You cannot miss this. And you need to know enough so that you're not scammed.
Right.
Crypto's not the scam. The scammers are the scam.
The scammers are the scam, for
So
sure.
that's what I would have people take away from. The scammers are the scam. I get scams in my text and my email every day. We didn't say let's ban text, although sometimes I wish we would. We didn't ban electronic mail, the first use case for the internet. So let's get smart about this. Don't move too fast, but don't move too slow. Let's learn while we go. And we're building the plane while we're flying it. So let's be intentional. Let's be underestimated in the space because people don't see us coming.
Right.
And there's no barrier. The only barrier to your participation is your lack of knowledge and your fear. So let's get rid of those and then let's make good choices.
Love that. Dr. Evans, now that we are wrapping it up, what's the fun fact that you want people to know about you?
Gosh, I gave so many away. I should have kept some to the end. Here's one. I don't know if you know about this, and some of my students find this every year. It's funny. When I was coming up I'm from Philly, and I came up in the neo soul generation. Also, being creative, I was a rapper back in the day. This is a little fun fact. You're not gonna find that on the interwebs. You're not gonna find that, but you got to pay me for my bars, but I still have them. But also a spoken word artist. So I came up in the time, one of my best friends back in the day was Jill Scott, even before she was the Who Is Jill Scott, her first album, vinyl back in the day. And I used to do a lot of spoken word. So I have a series of spoken word books and I have a spoken word CD. I was one of those forward-thinking spoken word artists back in the day because I also competed with Def Poetry Jam. It was a thing on HBO at the time, along with Def Jam Records. And let me not overstate it. I performed at TLA as the finalist for a Def Poetry Jam contest in Philly. And one of the Def Jam recording artists was Music Soul Child. And he was coming in to perform it with the TLA is on South Street. South Street is a big time thing in Philly. And so I was invited to be the opener for Music Soul Child. And when I got there, I was the opener to the opener to the opener. But baby, I brought it. And everybody's talking and nobody wants to hear a poet, but and I sing as well. We had a little band and all this. And by the end, it was vibes before we called it vibes. And it was a moment. It was a moment. So I've had some very creative, very cool moments. My dressing room was a horrible bathroom in TLA, but I was on stage. I was on stage. I was a moment. I was that girl back in the day.
That's amazing. I'm going to do some research. That's fantastic.
Let's go. You can find it on CD Baby. You can find it on YouTube.
Let me give you some of these.
One.
So before we wrap up, can you please let the audience know the best ways to find you, buy your book, and get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So all around the web, I'm IP Prof Evans, stands for Intellectual Property Professor Evans. Watch out for the fakes and the phonies. I don't slide into the DMs and say, hey, how you doing? I have a few other things to do. So, but do follow me there. Also, come to AdvantageEvans.com. It's the first stop if you want to find webinars, courses that you could take online. Occasionally, I do live cohorts. I already started one for the summer, so the next one, the wait list is open for the fall. I work primarily at this point with legacy leaders, lawyers who are really trying to pivot, but I also have an extensive YouTube channel of information and some webinars for investors. And certainly one of your first stops should be to get a copy of Digital Money Demystified. It's available wherever books are sold. Get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Partridge in the Pear Tree. And you can come to Digital Money Demystified and find all those places as well. So digitalmoneydemystified.com. Oh, final thing. I have this little thing called a podcast weekly. It drops weekly. We have new live content called Tech Intersect podcast. Then we also have video on Mondays as well that drops on our YouTube FinTech channel. So check us out. But top two places to stop, AdvantageEvans.com and DigitalMoneyDemystified.com.
Are you living in another timeline? How do you have all this time to do all the things you just listed? I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. Well, well, thank you so much, Dr. Evans, for joining us today. And special thanks to our Butterscotch queens and kings out there for joining this conversation. And be sure to check out all of the Get Down episodes that are available on your favorite platforms. Until next time.